When was the last time you made a decision that was entirely only yours? Not a decision your circumstances made inevitable. Not one your partner, your parents, or your fear of disappointing someone quietly made for you. Not the one that looked like a choice, but was really just the path of least resistance dressed up in the language of maturity. A real decision, one where you knew the cost, saw the alternatives, and chose anyway, because it was what you actually wanted. Take a moment with that. Most people, when they sit with it honestly, find the answer is further back than they expected. And the uncomfortable thing isn't the distance, it's the realization that nobody took that capacity away from you. You handed it over gradually to the roles that were easier to perform than the self that was harder to defend. Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, and he was brutal about what it actually is. Not confusion, not weakness, not the understandable result of a difficult life, a choice, the deliberate, daily decision to pretend you are not free, so you never have to carry what freedom actually costs. You perform the role of the employee, the partner, the responsible one, the person your family recognized, and somewhere in the performance, you stopped noticing it was one. Here's what this video is going to show you. Sartre spent his career mapping the exact mechanism by which people disappear into their own lives. The waiter who performs waiter instead of existing as a man. The freedom you cannot escape no matter how hard you run from it. The invisible audience you've been performing for since you were a child. You'll learn to catch the precise moment happening in your day-to-day when you slip from author into actor. And you'll understand what it actually takes to take the pen back. Not someday, not when conditions improve, but starting with the next decision in front of you. Because the question isn't whether you're free. You are. Entirely, terrifyingly, inescapably free. The question is whether you're willing to admit it. Watch him for a minute before you decide he's just good at his job. He crosses the cafe floor a little too fast for a Tuesday morning, a little too precise, like someone counting steps he shouldn't need to count. He leans toward the table slightly further than the order requires. His voice carries an eagerness that has nothing to do with coffee. And when he walks back to the counter, tray balanced, there's a strange rhythm to it. Controlled, almost mechanical, the way a tightrope walker turns falling into choreography. This is the waiter Sartre watched in a Paris cafe. And what he noticed wasn't competence. It was performance. Not badly done. Brilliantly done. The man was playing at being a waiter the way a child plays at being a soldier. Completely. Precisely. Because something in him needed the role to swallow him whole. A grocer who dreams offends the customer, Sartre wrote. Because a grocer who dreams is not wholly a grocer. Swap grocer for whatever word describes what you do for money, for your family, for the version of you that shows up reliably at breakfast every morning. The sentence still lands. You have a waiter too. It's the version of you with the tone everyone recognizes, the reactions everyone can predict before you've had them, the competence people have learned to lean on because it never surprises them. It isn't fake, exactly. It's worse than fake. It's real enough that it has started fooling you as well. The name for this mechanism is bad faith, and what makes it different from an ordinary lie is that you are both the one lying and the one being lied to. Some part of you has to already know the lie is happening for it to work at all. You don't tell yourself, I have no choice, the way you'd state a false fact to a stranger. You tell yourself in a tone that anticipates the doubt and buries it before it can surface. Which means, underneath the performance, some part of you already knows the role isn't the whole truth. That's the real reason the waiter moves a little too fast, a little too precisely. A man who has nothing to hide doesn't need to perform this convincingly. Here is where it becomes useful today. The next time you catch yourself reacting the way you always react. The practiced tone, the automatic yes, the smile that arrives before you've checked whether you mean it. Stop for exactly 1 second and ask a single question. Would I still choose this if no one were watching me choose it? Not whether the action is right or wrong, just whether it's yours. Most of the time, the answer arrives faster than you'd like, and it isn't the one you wanted. That question won't fix anything by itself. It's a crack, not a solution. But a crack is where the light gets in. Because if you're playing a role instead of making a choice, something else is doing the choosing for you. And what's waiting in the next part is the reason that's true. A freedom so total, so inescapable, that hiding from it became easier than living it. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Most people think of freedom as something you have more or less of. More on a weekend, less at a job you hate, none at all in certain families. Sartre thought that was backwards. He didn't think freedom was a possession. He thought it was a condition you cannot get rid of, no matter how badly you'd like to. I am condemned to be free, he wrote in Being and Nothingness. Condemned, not blessed, not gifted. A sentence handed down at birth with no appeal. He meant something precise by it. There is no limit to your freedom except freedom itself. You are not free to stop being free. Even the choice to hand your life over to circumstance, to a role, to what everyone expects, that's still a choice. You made it. Nobody made it for you. This is the part people resist hardest because it removes the one thing bad faith depends on, a place to put the blame. I had no choice is the sentence you reach for at least once a week, and it feels true in the moment you say it. It rarely is. There was a choice. It just cost something you didn't want to pay. A friendship, a paycheck, a version of yourself people were comfortable with. So you called it impossible instead of expensive. And the difference between those two words is the entire distance between honesty and bad faith. Sartre illustrated this with a story that has stayed with philosophers for decades precisely because it is so ordinary. A student came to him during the German occupation of France, torn between two obligations he could not reconcile: stay with his mother, who depended entirely on him and would not survive his absence well, or leave for England to join the Free French forces and fight for something larger than one household. Every moral framework he reached for collapsed under the weight of the actual decision. Christian ethics said, love your neighbor. But which neighbor? The one in front of you, or the ones dying in the war? Kantian ethics said, treat people as ends, never means. But staying meant using the fighters as means, and leaving meant using his mother the same way. No philosophy gave him the answer. No authority could tell him what to do. He was, in that corridor between two impossible obligations, utterly alone with his freedom. And that aloneness, Sartre said, is not a tragic exception. It is the permanent condition of every human being who is honest enough to stop pretending otherwise. What makes that story land so hard is not the drama of wartime. It's the recognition that you face a version of the same structure constantly, in decisions that look nothing like a soldier's dilemma. Every time you stay in a situation because leaving feels too costly, every time you choose the path that requires the least explanation to the people watching, every time you defer the real decision to some future version of yourself who will supposedly have more clarity, you are that student, standing in the corridor, pretending the door is locked when you are holding the key. Look at the shape of it in your own week. You stayed quiet in the meeting because you had no choice. You said yes to the family obligation because you had no choice. You took the safer option because you had no choice. Now go back through each one and replace I had no choice with I chose this. And here's what I was avoiding. Watch how fast the sentence changes texture. It stops being a wall and starts being a confession. That's the tool, and it costs nothing but honesty. Whenever the phrase, I had no choice, shows up in your own head today, stop and finish the sentence differently. I chose this because the alternative would have cost me big E. Say the actual cost out loud, even just to yourself. You'll find that most of what you called impossible was actually just expensive, and you decided quietly that you weren't willing to pay. None of this means circumstance doesn't matter. You didn't choose the family you were born into, the body you woke up in, the century you happened to land in. Sartre never denied that. What he denied was that any of it determines what you do next. The situation is given. The response to it never is. And that response, moment after moment, is the only material you have to build a self out of. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you more than the waiter did. If nothing outside you is deciding your next move, then there is no floor beneath you catching the choice before you make it. No script, no fate, no nature to fall back on. Just you, suspended over your own life, having to decide anyway. Sartre had a word for exactly what that feeling is called, and in the next part, you're going to learn why running from it is the most human thing you do, and why it might be the last thing standing between you and the life you keep saying you want. Anguish. That's Sartre's word for a feeling most people spend their whole lives trying to medicate, distract, or explain away. And it isn't fear. Fear is what you feel about the world. Anguish is what you feel about yourself. Sartre gives a simple example, and it will feel uncomfortably familiar. Imagine walking a narrow path along a cliff, no guardrail. The fear is obvious. You might slip. The ground might give way. Gravity might do what gravity does. That's fear of the precipice. But there's a second feeling underneath it, quieter and worse. Not the fear of falling, but the fear of throwing yourself over. Not an accident, a choice, available to you at every single step, that nothing in the world is stopping you from making. That feeling has nothing to do with the cliff. It has to do with the terrifying amount of control you have over what happens next. That's anguish. It's what a soldier feels the night before a battle. Not fear of the shells, but fear of not knowing how he'll behave when they fall. It's what you feel the moment before a decision that has no rule book. Taking the job, ending the relationship, saying the thing you've rehearsed 100 times and never said. Fear says something bad might happen to you. Anguish says you might be the one who decides it, and there's no one else to check your work. Most people mistake the absence of this feeling for maturity. It isn't. It's usually evidence that bad faith has already done its job, that you've handed the decision to a role, a habit, that's just who I am, so convincingly that the terror of choosing never even gets to surface. Calm, in this specific sense, is not always peace. Sometimes it's a very well-built wall. Here's where that becomes something you can actually use. The next time you feel a flicker of anguish, that specific, stomach-drop unease, right before a real decision, not a fear of consequences, but a feeling closer to, I don't know what I'm going to do and no one is going to tell me. Don't rush to kill it with a quick decision or a distraction. Sit with it for 10 seconds longer than feels comfortable. That discomfort is not a malfunction. It's the most honest signal you'll get all day that the choice in front of you is actually yours, and that some part of you already knows it. This doesn't mean seeking anguish out for its own sake, turning every Tuesday into an existential crisis. It means stopping the reflex to numb the feeling the instant it appears, because that reflex is usually bad faith wearing the mask of self-care. The people who have genuinely integrated this, not as a philosophy they admire, but as a way of moving through decisions, don't describe it as suffering. They describe it as a strange kind of clarity, the feeling that, for once, they are actually present for their own life instead of watching it happen from behind a role they forgot they were playing. Anguish, understood correctly, is not the opposite of peace. It is the price of honesty. And honesty, in Sartre's world, is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. But there's a piece still missing, and it's the piece that explains why so much of this performance exists in the first place. You don't just perform for yourself, you perform for an audience, one that's watching you so closely and has been for so long that you've mistaken its opinion for your own conscience. Sartre called it the look. And once you see how it operates, you'll never watch a mirror, a group chat, or a family dinner the same way again. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. You are being watched. Not by a camera, not by a person standing in the room, by a version of other people you've built inside your own head and installed there so long ago you've stopped noticing it runs constantly. It is watching you right now. It watched you get dressed this morning. It watched you decide whether to say the thing you almost said in that conversation last week. And then it watched you not say it, and you called that maturity. Sartre had a name for the mechanism. He called it the look, le regard. And it is one of the most precise descriptions of a human experience ever written. He illustrates it with a scene so specific it's almost embarrassing to read. A man alone in a corridor, bent over a keyhole, listening through a door. No one is watching him. He is completely absorbed in what he is doing. And in that absorption, there is no self to observe, no audience to perform for. Just the act, the keyhole, the thing on the other side. Then footsteps in the hall. Suddenly, in that instant before he even turns around, something ruptures. He is no longer the one looking. He is being looked at. And in that shift, he doesn't just feel caught. He becomes an object, fixed, defined. A man bent over a keyhole, which is suddenly not just what he is doing, but what he is, at least in the eyes of whoever is walking toward him. Shame, Sartre writes, is not just a feeling. It is the recognition that there is a version of you that exists for others, and that you cannot fully access it, cannot control it, cannot correct it. You are that self, but you don't know it. You discover it in the moment someone else's look lands on you. What Sartre noticed, and what most people never quite articulate, is that this mechanism doesn't require anyone to actually be watching. The look gets internalized. The footsteps in the hallway move inside your head, and they never leave. You carry a permanent invisible audience, assembled from parents, peers, past humiliations, imagined judgments. And this audience shapes your choices in ways you no longer consciously track. You don't eat the thing you want at the restaurant because someone at the table will notice. You don't say what you actually think in the meeting because of the face someone might make. You don't pursue the thing that genuinely matters because the version of you that fails at it would exist, fully formed and visible, for others to see. This is what keeps people in supporting roles longer than any external obstacle could. Not circumstance, not lack of opportunity. A permanent audience whose approval you need so badly, you've built your life around not losing it. The practice here is harder than the keyhole question from part 2, but more revealing. At the end of today, take one decision you made, any decision, and ask not, was it right or wrong, but who was I performing it for? Name the audience. A parent, a version of yourself from 10 years ago, an ex, a colleague whose opinion you still carry around like furniture you've forgotten to throw out. You don't have to act on what you find yet. Just name it, because you cannot take authorship of a choice you don't yet realize you've been outsourcing. The look doesn't disappear when you understand it, but it loses the power to make choices for you the moment you can see it operating. And once you can see it, you're ready for the hardest question Sartre left on the table, the one about what you've done with every year of choices you've already made, and what that actually means about who you are right now. There is a fantasy most people carry so quietly they've never had to defend it. It goes like this. Somewhere underneath the job you fell into, the relationship you stayed in longer than you should have, the version of yourself you perform for the people who knew you first, there is the real you, intact, waiting, smarter than your resume suggests, more creative than your routine allows, capable of a love more expansive than the ones you've actually built. The circumstances weren't right. The timing was off. Given different conditions, you would have been someone else entirely, someone better. Sartre had no patience for this, and he was not gentle about it. In Existentialism is a humanism. He writes something that should be read slowly, and then again. The genius of Proust is the totality of the works of Proust, not the sensitivity he was born with, not the potential he carried. The books, what exists, what was made, what was done, that is the whole of it. Beyond the works, there is nothing to appeal to, and what is true of Proust is true of you. You are not the sum of your unlived possibilities. You are the sum of your actual choices, and the self you've been quietly reserving for better circumstances is not a self at all. It is a story you tell to avoid the weight of the one you've already written. This is Sartre's most confrontational idea, and also his most clarifying one. Not because it condemns you, it doesn't, but because it removes the hiding place. You cannot point behind yourself at the person you might have been and use that person as evidence against the person you are. The only evidence that exists is what you did, how you responded, what you chose when the situation was real and the cost was real, and no one was going to give you better conditions. The question this opens up is not a comfortable one. Look at the last 6 months of your life as if they were someone else's. Not with cruelty, just honestly. The pattern of what they prioritized, what they avoided, what they said they valued versus what they actually protected when it cost them something. What kind of person does that pattern describe? Not the person they intended to be, the person the choices actually built. Most people find a gap when they do this honestly, sometimes a small one, sometimes wide enough to be disorienting. That gap is not a verdict. It is information. It tells you exactly where bad faith has been operating, where the audience's approval replaced your own judgment, where I had no choice became a load-bearing wall in a life that needed a different architecture. Here's the practice, and it's the most concrete one in this video. Once a week, spend 10 minutes auditing not your intentions, but your actual choices. Where your time went, what you agreed to, what you avoided, what you said versus what you did. Not to generate guilt. Guilt is useless here. Sartre was explicit that remorse is just another way of not taking responsibility. The point of the audit is authorship, to see the self you are currently building, clearly enough to decide whether you want to keep building it in the same direction. Because the terrifying and liberating truth underneath all of this is that nothing is fixed. The waiter can stop performing. The man at the keyhole can turn around. The person who has spent years outsourcing their choices to an invisible audience can notice the audience and start choosing differently. Not all at once, not through a single dramatic act of reinvention, but through the small decisions that accumulate, quietly, into a life. And that brings us to the only place this video was ever going to end. Here is what nobody tells you about the moment you decide to take authorship of your own life. It doesn't announce itself. There is no music, no external confirmation that this is the turning point, that the old version of you is over, that what comes next will be different. Real authorship feels like nothing dramatic. It feels like a small, quiet decision made without an audience, without certainty, without the guarantee that it will lead anywhere at all. Sartre knew this. He never promised that freedom would feel like liberation. He said it would feel like weight. Man is condemned to be free, he wrote. And that word, condemned, was chosen with precision. The freedom is not a gift. It is a burden you didn't ask for, can't put down, and have to carry anyway. The question was never whether you would carry it. The question is whether you carry it consciously, as an author, or unconsciously, disguised as a character who had no other choice. Everything in this video has been pointing at a single thing: the gap between the life that is happening to you and the life you are making. Bad faith lives in that gap. The performed role, the invisible audience, the fantasy of potential that never had to prove itself, all of it exists to make that gap invisible, livable, even comfortable. What Sartre did, with a precision that no self-help framework has ever matched, was name the gap, not to shame you into closing it, but to make it undeniable. Once you have seen it clearly, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, every choice you make is a little more deliberate than it was before. That is not a small thing. It might be the only thing. The waiter from part 2 is still in that cafe. He is still moving too fast, still performing the role the world decided he should be, still disappearing into the choreography of a life that fits just precisely enough to never feel completely wrong. Maybe he always will. But you are not him, or you don't have to be, which is the same thing in Sartre's world. The difference between the waiter and someone who lives deliberately is not talent, not circumstance, not a better hand dealt by the world. It is one decision, made in the ordinary light of an ordinary day, to stop performing and start choosing. Not once. Again and again and again, until the choosing becomes the self, because that is all the self ever was. The next decision in front of you, not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not after you've figured out who you really are underneath all the roles, is the only place this starts. It doesn't have to be large. Sartre never said it had to be large. He said it had to be yours. So here's the only thing I'll ask you to do right now. Not a habit to build, not a system to install. Just 3 words in the comments: I choose me. Not because it changes anything by itself. Sartre would be the first to tell you that words without acts are just more performance. But because saying it publicly, without the guarantee that anyone will respond, with no role to hide behind, is already a small act of authorship. And small acts of authorship, repeated, are all a life is ever made of. If this video resonated with you, the one appearing on your screen right now will too. Click to keep watching.